It's The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, is with us. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Glad to welcome as well Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine.
Hi.
Nice to see you. She cracks the whip on the second floor at France24.com. Leila Jacinto is with us. How are you?
Good. Thank God it's Friday.
And Pierre Haski, president of Reporters Without Borders. Nice to see you.
I'm cracking the whips there.
Okay. The World This Week on Twitter and Facebook. Hashtag World This Week. He was anointed by Nelson Mandela. That was 20 years ago. Cyril Ramaphosa is now finally president of South Africa, capping a week of high drama. We're finally faced with a vote of no confidence. Jacob Zuma relinquished power in the face of enduring scandal. The 65-year-old Ramaphosa promising a clean slate and a crackdown on corruption.
To have this opportunity to address you all. We should put behind us the era of diminishing trust in public institutions and weakened confidence in our country's public leaders. We should put all the negativity that has dogged our country behind us, because a new dawn is upon us and a wonderful dawn has arrived.
Is it a new dawn for South Africa, Vivian Walt?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the sense of relief is really enormous across quite a wide spectrum in South Africa. South Africa's been really living under, tremendous stress for years now. It's been 9 years of Zuma. The economy is absolutely flatlined. Investors have been, very skittish about getting involved. The rates of inequality are just enormous, and the sense of a government that was truly out of control was really quite palpable in the country.
So a sense of relief that Zuma is gone, but can Ramaphosa live up to expectations now?
Actually, the expectations are pretty low in some quarters of South Africa, and you've already got the opposition parliament calling for parliament to be dissolved and for Ramaphosa to call fresh elections, because he has what is essentially a fairly weak mandate. He is succeeding a deeply unpopular president, but he has to clean up the country, somehow redistribute wealth in some way, and there's just a raft of problems that he's going to have to tackle fairly swiftly.
One of those is there was this call for free education. He says he'll have free education for the poorest students in the first year. State coffers are empty right now in South Africa. Do you agree with Viv when she says that Ramaphosa has a weak mandate?
He has, I wouldn't say a weak mandate, because I think there's low expectation, as Vivian said, and I think that's pretty sure, because people don't believe in politics anymore. They have been so disappointed by successive leadership since the exit of Nelson Mandela that they don't trust governments at all and politicians. But they have a new chance, and this phrase of new dawn is maybe lyrical, but you could sense that. I was listening to his speech, and I was listening particularly on SABC, the South African television, the arrival of the politicians from both government, ANC, and opposition in parliament. Even the opposition recognizes that there's a new phase. We've entered a new era in South Africa because they've had failed leaderships until now. And Ramaphosa at least has one asset. He's succeeded in almost everything he's touched for the past 40 years. He was a successful unionist. He was a successful negotiator during the transition with the apartheid government. He was a successful businessman when he was deprived of the possibility to succeed Mandela. And he was very successful in getting Zuma out without too much trouble. And really, in the past few days, there was this fear in South Africa that the ANC would be split, and it would be one ANC against the other.
Yeah, Zuma, there were those fears. Zuma, like Robert Mugabe in neighboring Zimbabwe, gave not one but two speeches in short succession, one where he resigned, and the previous one where he almost resigned.
I'm told now they're taking a decision that tomorrow in Parliament there's going to be a vote of no confidence. Nobody has even come to me to say, we are moving if we don't move. What is the rush? I've been asking this question all the time.
Leila Jacinto, what is the rush?
Yes, I mean, this pageantry we have of African leaders on their way out, just taking their time and, keeping their citizens on tenterhooks, and we have to listen to these long stories. But yes, I mean, I agree. Of course, there's euphoria in South Africa. But the question, of course, is how did Zuma continue for 9 years? And, and the ANC taking this very soft option now of putting Cyril Ramaphosa in. Of course, anyone who's not Zuma is fine for now. But how did Africa's largest economy reach this state? I mean, the level of corruption. The Public Protector's Office came out with this report that detailed all this corruption, and it just went on for 9 years. So yes, there's a party on now, but like all too often, I think South Africans are going to have to wake up to reality. The economy has not, the industrial base of the economy has not really changed since the Second World War, really, and so there are really fundamental questions.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think Ramaphosa is really an interesting guy, partly because he did have this long line of successes, and one of the things that's most interesting is that there were a long line of successes in South Africa. A lot of the leadership, when we're talking about Thabo Mbeki, when we're talking about Jacob Zuma, we're talking about people who were in exile. While all the heavy-duty stuff was going on the ground with the ANC, they were in exile. This is precisely why Mandela wanted Ramaphosa to be his successor, because he was a man who had been on the ground, who knew the players, who had done the negotiations, who had dealt with the real world of South Africa, not the theoretical one preached by the exiles. And I think that probably will stand him in good stead now. He seems to have a very good relationship with the business community. He seems to have the potential to build the economy now, which was plagued not only by corruption, but, as I understand it, by this whole attitude of the ANC that was kind of, what can you say, stymied by its own political inability. And I think, so I think it probably is a new dawn for South Africa. Anyway, let's hope.
Vivian Walt, interviewing Cyril Ramaphosa over the years, did you sense one day this would be his destiny?
He was always a very charismatic leader. He's universally in South Africa known as Cyril. Nobody ever called Zuma Jacob, but Cyril is known by everybody as Cyril. He was the kind of guy who really connected with people from a very early age, I think. A big talker, very kind of gregarious personality, which will stand him in quite good stead. And I think Chris hit on something very important, which is that this really is a kind of transition from the exile generation to a much more real governing party, which it hasn't been for way too long. For way too long, it's been a kind of liberation movement now governing the country. Now most of the country has been born after apartheid, and they want a government that functions, and that functions well. It's a very kind of westernized country, and they're simply fed up with what's been happening.
Pierre Haski?
I think if we want to be positive, we have to see that the country has stood pretty strongly. It's been through two dysfunctional presidents. Mbeki was definitely a very clever man, but he failed on many issues. And Zuma was totally dysfunctional, corrupt, and inefficient.
and until Wednesday, there was this feeling that perhaps this slide towards patronage politics, like in other parts of Africa, was inevitable. Was just destiny.
And you have this strong institution, civil society, media, because the media played their part in uncovering the corruption. Zuma has been very strong at trying to cover up everything that happened. With there are strong institutions in South Africa. He tried to destroy them, the anti-corruption elite squads and so on. He failed, and the country is still on its feet. So there is something very positive as a lesson in what happened in South Africa. It doesn't mean the path from now is easy, because the economy is in bad shape and the country is pretty divided socially and racially and on every aspect. But still, it's on its feet.
The day that ended with Jacob Zuma resigning began with a police raid at the compound of this Indian family, which wielded huge influence, employers of 2 of his children, 4 of his wives, and one of those Gupta brothers, Ajay Gupta, who's now there's a search for him. Is justice blind in this case? Because some are saying it's no coincidence that raid happened. Is this victor's justice?
Definitely it was. The fact that apparently one of the brothers, the eldest brother, Ajay Gupta, is probably a fugitive. So, he could, there are reports that he could be in Dubai, which would make extradition difficult. But, the fact that the minute Cyril Ramaphosa took on the leadership of the party, the Gupta brothers knew that the end was closed. They pretty much knew the end was closed for many years. Banks wouldn't touch them. A British public relations firm that handles the accounts of dictators and all sorts of corrupt officials, they actually went into bankruptcy handling the Gupta brother account. They turned so toxic. But what you said was absolutely right, because with the Gupta brothers, the term that everybody was using was state capture. And a lot of South Africans, this was the term of economic textbooks, which started becoming reality, where you infiltrate the institutions of the state to benefit groups or individuals. And it really seemed like, this was destiny and nobody could do anything about it. And you're right. The Gupta brothers there are arrest warrants for that. Jacob Zuma is out. This is not the end. He's probably going to have to face charges, and there will be a lot coming out from proceedings.
The same day that Zuma resigned, Zimbabwe's opposition leader and former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai passing away of cancer at 65. Admirers call him the only man ever to have beaten Robert Mugabe at the ballot box, even if it wasn't recognized. Mugabe would ultimately cling to power, cracking down with Tsvangirai himself suffering a brutal beating. He persevered, boycotted do-over votes, and in 2008 made the tough choice of accepting a national unity government to avoid the bloodshed from spreading further.
I have signed this agreement because I believe it represents the best opportunity for us to build a peaceful, prosperous, democratic Zimbabwe. I have signed this agreement because my belief in Zimbabwe and its peoples runs deeper than the scars I bear from the struggle.
And many inside the opposition decried the fact that he cut that deal with Robert Mugabe. Is he a hero for that, though, Vivian Walt? Did he save lives, or should he have stood his ground and stayed steadfast in opposition?
I think it must have been an excruciating decision for him. I don't quite know where I stand on this one. I think with some international intervention, it probably might have helped, and there might have been a way to get Mugabe out. The real problem was actually that at that point, and it was still Thabo Mbeki, if I'm not mistaken, was a big ally of Robert Mugabe and was going to protect him. And South Africa really overshadowed a lot of what happened under the Mugabe era.
Now there's Cyril Ramaphosa in power. So what does that mean for countries like Zimbabwe, like Angola, which has a new president, and like DR Congo, whose president has outstayed his welcome? His mandate's already expired.
Well, I think South Africa has already lost a lot of clout on the continent. It used to be, when Mandela was president, there was a lot of expectation that South Africa would be the superpower of the continent that would help solve problems, bring democracy, and so on. It failed to do that, and particularly the case of Zimbabwe was definitely very, very sour, because there was this comradeship from the liberation struggle time, and Mbeki, who was, you have to remember, he was based in Lusaka in Zambia for many years, with the external relations of the ANC, and there was a very powerful comradeship between ZANU, PF, the Zimbabwe movement, the MPLA and Frelimo, the Mozambique and Angola movements, and these bonds remained afterwards. Today, I think Ramaphosa, as we said earlier, he's from a different background. He was not involved in those exile comradeship and fear of being attacked and so on. He's of a different mold, and I don't think South Africa will be so involved at first. But if he manages to get the country back on its feet economically, it might become again a kind of regional, if not continental powerhouse.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I mean, I think it's terrible that Tsvangirai died, and I have no sense, maybe you do, I don't have any sense of what the opposition is like in Zimbabwe anymore. I mean, the characteristic of all dictators, especially those who hang around as long as Mugabe hung around, is that they eliminate any other options. They basically make it impossible for anybody to organize political parties or organize an opposition that can challenge them, so that even when they go, what's left behind is not democracy, but often chaos.
That's why he was threatened finally by his number two and not by an opposition leader.
Exactly. So I don't know how that, who knows how that's going to play out, and I don't have any sense of whether there's a viable or growing opposition. My guess is that there's not in Zimbabwe.
There isn't, no.
No. So then the role of a resurgent South Africa could be very interesting, and specifically of Ramaphosa, because he's the kind of guy that certainly the West looks for, and because he's not part of the old, well, let's just call it what it was, with the old national liberation mafia, which was essentially underwritten by the Soviet Union. And guess what? When the Soviet Union folded, so did all those national liberation movements.
Well, they're all in power still, you know.
Well, they came into power, but
they're still there.
Yeah, but the question in the question with the ANC, I think, would have been: would all those exiles have gone back and decided to cut the deal that they did, if the Soviet Union was still backing them, and it wasn't?
All right, a new dawn for South Africa. Definitely new times for humanitarian aid agencies after a scandal at Oxfam has now spread. We'll be talking about that when we come back in The World This Week.
France 24, c'est l'info mondiale, partout, toujours à portée de clic.
We look at how technology is shaping the future, and we show you the latest gadgets you can soon get your hands on.
نقدم لكم الاقتصاد بطريقة مختلفة، نبسط المفاهيم والمصطلحات كي تكتمل الصورة لديكم.
At France 24, we love a good argument.
La différence sur France 24, c'est l'idée du reportage. Nos grands reportages, vous ne les verrez nulle part ailleurs.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
It is illegal, but in the rural areas of southern Malawi, a violent custom shows no sign of going away. On the pretext of sexual purification, girls are sent by their parents to be raped by men. These men, who are paid by the families, are known as the hyenas. They operate by night to maintain their anonymity because, officially, the practice is banned. But tradition still trumps the law, and sexual initiation camps still exist. In an exclusive investigation, our reporters went to meet both the rapists and their victims.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume the world this week, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. South Africa's new president promises a new dawn. Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address before Parliament, coming less than 48 hours after the ouster of his predecessor, Jacob Zuma. The U.S. Secretary of State in Turkey, the two nations announcing, quote, new mechanisms to improve a soured relationship. Both sides staying vague, though, about Washington's support for Kurdish militias in Syria. The U.S. president to meet in Florida with families as that state prepares for the first funerals of victims from the worst U.S. school shooting in 5 years. Donald Trump making no mention of gun control yet. At the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, France's 16-year-old sensation sat down with France 24. We'll hear from snowboard cross silver medalist Julia Pereira de Souza. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor of The Daily Beast, is with us. How are you, sir? Welcome back as well to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine, France24.com, senior editor, Lila Jacinto, and Pierre Haski, president of Reporters Without Borders. Pierre, I've got to ask you, there was some good news and some bad news out of Turkey this Friday. One day after the German chancellor spoke with the Turkish prime minister, the release of this German-Turkish journalist, Dennis Yücel, who'd been held without a charge for more than a year. He's the correspondent for Die Welt. At the same time, 6 other journalists locally sentenced to life in prison.
Yes, as you said, good news and very bad news. And this latter announcement was really a disgrace. I attended the trial in November of the Ahmet and Mehmet Altan, 2 brothers who are accused of ludicrous charges, of having given subliminal messages on TV on the eve of the attempted coup in 2016. And the trial was really completely fabricated and arbitrary. And I'm not surprised by the heavy sentences that have been passed on them, because that was the purpose, is to get rid of free press, of instilling fear among other journalists, and getting rid of people. The Altan brothers are very well known in Turkey, the long-time editorialists and editors, and no one believes a second the charges that have been on them.
How are Western governments going to, or especially European governments, are they going to ignore it?
Unfortunately, I think they're going to ignore it because they need Turkey for controlling the migrants, controlling the returning jihadists from Syria, for keeping Turkey within NATO. I mean, you can see, Erdogan was in Paris a few weeks ago, and even if Emmanuel Macron said a few good things about press freedom and other issues, it all went very well, and the German government intervened for German-Turkish journalists, but it has to lie down on domestic issues. So we really are in a delicate balance of power with Turkey at the moment, particularly as Turkey is now intervening directly in Syria.
We're going to turn our attention now to a case or a scandal which could change the way we look at humanitarian aid. Oxfam vowing to set up an independent panel to most notably review hiring practices and prevent predators from having access to the most vulnerable. This after the Times of London first revealed how past staff used prostitutes, some perhaps underage, in Haiti and elsewhere.
At a personal level, I'm so shocked and hurt. I'm struggling. And that's the same with the thousands of Oxfam good staff, people of values, working around the world and sacrificing, delivering life-saving assistance. We're all in shock. We are appalled, and we are sorry.
Oxfam's International Executive Director, Winnie Byanyima, is shocked, but not her former head of safeguarding. She spoke to Channel 4.
We'd been doing confidential surveys, about 120 staff, and the results were very, very concerning. People reporting that they'd either witnessed or experienced rape or attempted rape.
By Oxfam
representatives. And in one country programme, that was 7% of staff were saying that. And across the programmes, we had about 1 in 10 saying they'd experienced unwanted sexual touching, sexual assault.
So that survey dates back to 2012, Leila Jacinto. Your thoughts on this scandal?
I mean, it's shocking. It's horrendous. But what's worse is, as with actually the church sex scandal too, is when these things come to light, you realize that this has been happening for so long, that there is awareness in the organization, and in Oxfam's case, apparently there were some moves to they did inform the Charities Commission, but there was definitely a sense of keep this under control, and in order for aid organizations and for aid workers to target the most vulnerable of people is frankly horrendous, and also for aid workers who are actually doing an incredible job in the field. Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders, MSF, has. I know their work, especially from Afghanistan, and right now MSF has also been brushed with this. So there's nothing to be said. This is awful.
Vivian Walt, what do you do when it comes to these prayers? Should there be like some data bank? Because the head of Oxfam is saying sometimes as an emergency, we have to hire a lot of people at short notice. We try to screen everybody. It's not an easy job.
We've all been in these situations as journalists, and all of us around this table, where we've gone into some incredible crisis or war or natural disaster, and you see dozens of aid workers, many of whom are completely fresh to the terrain, and a lot of them are getting to meet each other for the first time. And it is kind of like this floating emergency army that gets flown from place to place. And it's very easy to see how accountability falls through the cracks like this. However, after this scandal, I highly doubt this is going to happen again. There are going to be systems put in place, as they ought to have been for years. And Leila mentioned the church scandal. It's so much like the church scandal. You have people who are highly vulnerable, basically placing their lives and their, dependence in the hands of people who then utterly betray them.
All right, the man at the heart of the scandal, Belgian aid worker Walter van Hovermeiren, denies wrongdoing after published reports about his doings in Liberia while working for another NGO, Merlin, and before being hired by Oxfam.
In Liberia, I was lured into a trap. I was so stupid to take part in a party at a pub. Actually, people were dancing at the party and girls jumped around scantily dressed. My English deputies invited me. I also danced. Afterwards, it turned out that they were prostitutes. I only danced, and I was sanctioned for this. I believe that was right. I believe that I should have acted more firmly there. I regret that.
Says he's not perfect, but says there's a lot of exaggerations. Of course.
Look, I think that one of the differences with the Catholic Church situation, first of all, there are some allegations. There may have been some underage women or prostitutes involved, but we're not talking about pederasty and pedophilia on a massive scale, which is really what you're looking at with the Catholic Church. But also the environment in which these aid organizations work, which, as Viv was saying, is something that we've all seen quite a few times, is one that encourages some people who have kind of cowboy personalities. They go in there and they're going to restore order out of chaos, or that's what they think they will do. They're going to hand out aid. They're going to organize assistance for people. They're going to do all this, and there's a certain kind of personality that feels almost godlike when you're doing this. So I'm sure, I can just imagine what these people were thinking, that they felt that they needed a little reward. And once you start thinking like that in a situation like they were running in Haiti, then you can get into a lot of trouble. But I am not convinced that you are going to be able to create a lot of safeguards that will stop that from happening, because basically a lot of these operations have to fly by the seat of their pants, particularly when they start.
Well, one of the safeguards that was when we talked about it in the France 24 debate on was this sort of Me Too effect. And the aid workers that we spoke to talked about a macho culture inside of a lot of humanitarian aid organizations, and saying one of the ways to redress all of this is get more women in positions of power inside these big humanitarian aid groups.
You know, what happened is that these NGOs started as groups of friends. You know, I mean, MSF was started by Bernard Kouchner and a few other French doctors who were shocked by what they saw in the Biafra war in the 60s in Nigeria, and they created these organizations which were outside the International Red Cross and the UN system to have more freedom to access war zones. Then they professionalized because they became big. They had to become professional medically or technically. What is probably lacking is a better recruitment, more ethical rules, better control, and maybe a kind of Me Too culture where you know that if you're doing something wrong, you're going to be reported and you're not going to be covered up, as in these cases. That's the only way to save the excellent work that these groups are doing. And in many circumstances, they are the only one doing that work with refugees or with the victims of wars where nobody else cares. So it's a matter of survival for this huge system of NGOs.
The world this week doesn't always wade into the political crises of far-flung tropical islands. But already when the president of the Maldives, population 400,000, ordered a crackdown that included the shutting down of parliament and the arrest of 2 Supreme Court justices, it perked our attention. When the exiled former president appealed to India to send troops, that really put the standoff on the map. Delhi's intervened before in the Maldives, but this would be messy now that China has gone full in with investment there. Before 2011, Piaski, Beijing didn't even have an embassy in the Maldives.
First, the tourists arrived, because there are many Chinese tourists in the Maldives. But then the Maldives became a strategic asset for China. And definitely, since China has expanded into this new Silk Road program, they've put a lot of money in those countries, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, and in the Maldives. And that has India worried, because you have the 2 giants of Asia are really competing for influence. So now the assessment that is being done in the Maldives is that the government owes so much money to China. We're talking about $2 billion for a small country of that size, that it has no other choice than relying on China. And that's where the competition between Delhi and Beijing is really creating a dangerous situation.
Yeah, and the accusations by Delhi that the Chinese can now set up a listening post because it's close enough to the Indian subcontinent that they can listen into military bases in India. The Indians, though, and the Chinese treading cautiously so far. There haven't been big diplomatic outbursts on this one.
As well, they should, because these are 2 mighty military powers, and yes, of course, there's the ousted Maldives president asking for Indian intervention. He can ask, but India is not going to intervene, and certainly not in Maldives. The Indian military force really faced a bashing in Sri Lanka when they were invited to crush the Tamil Tigers. The Chinese military, India has lost a war in 1964 that the effects of which are still felt. It's historically weighs on the Indian military. So this is going to be a sort of a Cold War. India certainly does not like this thrust into the Indian Ocean, but we're nowhere near coming to a military standoff on this.
Now, if India and China have treaded cautiously with their statements on the Maldives, no holding back over a visit by the Indian Prime Minister this week to a border state. Glimpses from my Arunachal Pradesh visit where I inaugurated various projects touched by the warmth of the people. That's a tweet by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His visit drawing a sharp rebuke from Beijing. The Chinese consider Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet, with the foreign ministry firmly opposed to the Indian leader's visit to the disputed area. That's a quote. Leela Jacinto, how problematic is it when Modi visits that border state?
Well, I mean, there's been an insurgency in that state, and for the longest time, you couldn't even travel there. Modi, came into power promising to mend relations with both India and with Pakistan and with China, and right now he's really pushing it there. Arunachal Pradesh, I mean, it must be said that it's been opening up now, and there have been infrastructure initiatives. But this game that India and China is playing is getting increasingly dangerous.
Increasingly dangerous?
They had a standoff last year over a road that China was building, and Indian troops arrived, and they looked at each other from a few meters for weeks, and then the two leaders decided to cool it off, and so. You don't need too much to get those two countries against each other, particularly, since China is now on the offensive, clearly on the international scene. Xi Jinping is making no bounds about that, and particularly the new Silk Road is going across Pakistan on regions that are disputed between Pakistan and India. It wants to go into Afghanistan. So there is a really this sense from India that China is surrounding it from all sides, and the Maldives is just another bit on that map.
Cynics would argue that by now we all know the drill. As a Florida community mourns its dead, the United States asks how a 19-year-old orphan with a troubled past could legally buy an AR-15 assault rifle before mowing down 17 at a high school in Parkland and critically injuring 3 more. The worst school shooting since the one 5 years ago at an elementary school in Connecticut. The President of the United States flying to Florida to comfort the victims. In remarks from the White House on Thursday, he talked about mental health, but avoided the G word, guns, something the Republican governor of Florida is not afraid to do.
Next week in Tallahassee, I'm going to sit down with state leaders. We're going to have a real conversation about 2 things. How do we make sure when a parent is ready to send their child to school that in Florida, that parent knows that child is going to be safe? Number 2, how do we make sure that individuals with mental illness do not touch a gun?
Chris Verdicki?
Yeah, but he's still not talking about controlling guns in any way, shape, or form. Look, it's a big, complicated problem. It's not as simple as the gun control people are always advocating. But the fact is, to have automatic rifles or semi-automatic rifles, assault rifles that are military-grade, AR-15s, you put a bump stock on them, and you can slaughter people the way they were slaughtered in Las Vegas. And even without a bump stock, you can just pull the trigger as fast as you can, and you can murder 17 people in a high school. That's insane. There's no reason for anybody, any civilian, to have an automatic or semi-automatic weapon like an AR-15, M16, Kalashnikov, or any of the others that are available in the United States. And they used to be outlawed. Until 2004, there was a ban on weapons like that, but not any longer, because the NRA, the National Rifle Association, has said that any kind of control on any kind of weapons, any kind of guns, is the slippery slope that will lead to the state coming and seizing your guns and taking them from you. And it's an insane argument. What I think everybody, including students now who've been tweeting from the school that was attacked, is saying, basically, let's be reasonable about this. Okay, let's understand that you can't have automatic weapons just floating around with any 19-year-old can go and buy them in the state of Florida and do whatever he wants with them. But it could get even worse. And Congress has been considering a law that would allow you if you have what's called an open carry permit to carry a pistol, wherever you go in, say, Montana, then you can do the same in New York City. You can take your pistol to New York City and walk around with it. Well, that is completely nuts, because the environment, an urban environment, is, let's face it, very different than Montana, and very different from a lot of the places where you have these open carry laws. And when you're in an environment like New York City or Los Angeles or Atlanta, for that matter, if you have open carry, you're going to have a lot more shootings.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you, Christopher Dickey. I want to thank as well Lila Jacinto, Pierre Aski, Vivian Walt. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Every dog has its day, or its year.
Oh dear, you've been waiting to use that all day. It is, of course, Chinese New Year, and it is Year of the Dog. And it has everyone reaching for Twitter to send their best wishes, like this one here, Kung Hei Fat Choi, and a little pug alongside. In fact, it's been so popular here in France that it was trending in the top 10 twice because people were tweeting in French and English about it, which is quite unusual, I think it's fair to say. Other people are just using these cute images like this one. It's a bit of an excuse, really, to prove that you are a dog person.
Usually it's cats playing the piano, but now it's...
Yes, today is definitely the day of the dog, especially online. In China, though, one of their celebrations, a television programme, has kind of courted controversy rather spectacularly, I think it's fair to say. We've got some of the images from last night's programme. It's called the Spring Festival Gala, and it's shown on CCTV. Now, it's an annual variety show that celebrates Chinese New Year, and up to 800 million people will have watched this go out. Aside from live sport, basically, it's the most watched programme in the world. And as you can see, rather unusually for a mainstream television programme, you have a Chinese actress there in blackface. And that is, of course, what has caused all of the controversy. In real life, she's a Chinese woman by the name of Lu Neiming. She's followed around by a monkey, you notice on set. Now, the monkey, just to add insult to injury, is played by a gentleman from the Ivory Coast. Some people have been trying to sort of defend what happened here. This Twitter user in China saying, you have to accept that there probably are not many black actors in China or can speak Chinese. They weren't talking in exaggerated accents or mocking people either. A lot of people begging to differ, and there were a lot of black people on stage during that performance. It was a 13-minute part of the programme, featuring a lot of black dancers and some of the black actresses as well, so that doesn't really carry that kind of argument. It's been reported on around the world, unsurprisingly, and basically the idea of this part of the show was supposed to highlight the strength of the relations between China and Africa. It's kind of done anything but, certainly when you look at the global reactions. This is a journalist who lives in China who says after 4 hours, China's New Year Gala has finally found its embarrassing racist groove, clearly something that this gentleman was expecting to happen. This woman in Japan says, China, why? I'm watching the Spring Festival New Year's Gala. There's straight up blackface. I just don't know what to do with this level of offensive. Oh, my God. This woman, a Chinese photographer, says it ruined her Chinese New Year. She feels ashamed for her country.
A lot of criticism from inside of China, and a lot of Chinese upset about this.
Yes, because you now have quite a number of Chinese who are accustomed to relations with Africa, who've lived there or who have been in contact with Africans in China, which was not the case 10 or 15 years ago. And these people know exactly what should not happen on stage, particularly on a day like that.
Yes, and on the Chinese social media website Weibo, lots of people complaining about it, although the South China Morning Post noting that many of the critical entries have actually been removed by censors.
Removed by censors. The Year of the Dog, what's it going to be like? I saw there were effigies of Trump in some of the parades, right?
Yes, absolutely. He is being talked about a great deal, not least because people are looking at what the Year of the Dog will mean for him. He was himself born in the Year of the Dog. He's actually, to be precise, a fire dog, which apparently means he's hot-tempered, talkative, and not in harmony with others. Now, courts, among many journalists, have actually spoken to various feng shui masters. I always thought that was about organising your furniture, future, but apparently they can make forecasts and predict the future. And what they say, these 3 feng shui masters, slightly different takes on it, but really it doesn't bode well. Apparently, if you are born under a particular sign, when that sign comes around, it's actually bad luck rather than good luck.
Unless you wear something red. You have to wear something red all the year to protect you against the excesses of your own animal.
Thanks, she must.
Good to know. Interestingly, no one's mentioned that in these articles. But yes, in this Quartz piece, they say that he will face relationship problems, policy failures, and possibly even being removed from office. It's worth noting that Melania was born in the year of the dog too, so their relationship very much under the Chinese astrological spotlight. Raymond Lowe is one of the people they spoke to for this, and this is his prediction here. I have no idea what all of that means. Basically, he says, expect plenty of resistance in the first 6 months, but if he survives October, then in November, where we have the midterms, it could all come out in his favour after all. Hedging their bets a bit, I think.
Christopher Dickey, something you've predicted. Anyway, we'll see. I want to thank our panel. Thank you, Emma James. Thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here. And happy Year of the Dog from all of us here at The World This Week.